Hi, I'm Mark Cousins, and 10 years ago I made something called The Story of Film, and now 10 years later I've made an update of it, and it's called The Story of Film, A New Generation. Making the original Story of Film was really hard work, and we had very little money, and it was like backpacking around the world. So I said, never again, I'm never updating it. But my producer and their production company, Hopscotch and John Archer, are really great. And they, after a decade, said, look, maybe it's time to look back. We've had 10 years of cinema, and an awful lot of interesting things has happened in these last 10 years. So I thought, okay, we'll update the Story of Film. And then lockdown happened, and it was an opportunity for me to watch more and to think about what I'd seen in the last 10 years. The thing you notice when you look at what's happened in cinema recently is that more people from more backgrounds are making cinema. Cinema is more diverse than it's ever been. And regularly people say to me, oh, cinema's so boring at the moment, or there's no good movies. And I just say, you're looking in the wrong places. Look at Thailand, look at Romania, look at Philippines, look at Japan. You know, the fertility of cinema is substantial at the moment, but it's very global. And because the equipment is miniaturized, it means that more and more people are getting to tell their stories. For me, the Story of Film has got a number of principles. It has to be not snobby. That's crucial. You know, it should include big mainstream films because I love big mainstream films. And the second thing it really needs to have is an interest in innovation. Lots of the most enjoyable films are great, but they're not innovative. And so when you decide to look at innovation, who was doing something new in cinema, then it helps you with the spine of your story. It helps you to work out what to include and what to exclude. You know, cinema is a multiverse. It's a spider-verse in a way, you know, and so the whole thing about cinema is that it's accessible, it's for everyone, ideally, but it's also sublime. I often call cinema the affordable sublime. I can see something huge, luminous, and fantastic for, in my case, in my city, I can go to the cinema for £5. So you want to include all of cinema in it. You want to show the epic and the intimate, you know, the escapist and the profoundly challenging. You want to show all of that. And crucially for me, I want to try and not make the mistakes that many filmmakers or many film lovers in the Western world make, which is overlook big bits of cinema. I don't want to overlook Indian cinema because it's half of cinema. You know, I don't want to overlook documentary cinema because it's kind of half of cinema as well. Like half of all films are made are nonfiction. So once you decide that you don't want to make the elisions and the false generalizations about cinema that previous white males like me made, then you're onto interesting territory. And you really want to look at Indian cinema, for example, or African cinema, for example. My approach in this film is to look at themes and genres, not to go chronological. So I look at comedy, for example, and it was crucial for me to include Booksmart because I thought it was one of the funniest films of recent years. When I looked at action cinema, I wanted to have a great Indian epic, The Gangs of Wasseypur, one of the best Indian films ever made. But I also wanted to look at the Mad Max film and a range of things. I wanted to look at the great film Gravity, but see it as a kind of grief movie. I wanted to consider horror cinema and look at Babadook and Midsommar, for example. And the very first clip in the whole film is Joker. And what it's not giving too much away, but what I loved was at the very beginning of this film, taking Joker, which is a serious, troubling film, and cutting from Joker to Frozen, the animation, which has driven parents around the world mad for quite a long time now because of the songs. And those tonally dissimilar films, when you put them together, a spark flies. I'm always aware of the gaps in my knowledge. I try to see as much as possible, but there's loads that I don't see. And so I always think, what are there films from one part of the world that I haven't seen enough of? And if so, I plug that gap in my knowledge. Are there films by a certain filmmaker that I haven't seen enough of? If so, and of course there are, then I plug that gap. So it's always about, I always say that my ignorance is my best friend. As a movie fan, what I don't know, what I haven't seen is what I want to see, because it'll take me out of myself. It'll be a journey of discovery, a real pleasurable discovery. I take lots of notes. This is my notebook for this film, my terrible scribble. So I take notes when I watch films, but I've always had a good visual memory, and it really helps. Not verbal memory, not good, but visual memory. The images stick with me, and scenes in films stick with me, which means that when it comes to the editing of the film, I'm lucky enough that my mind can pull out a scene from that I saw maybe several years ago. But I also use certain techniques. I don't write on a computer, for example. I always use bits of paper. So for the story of film, A New Generation, I scribbled this. You can see how roughly this is written, but you can see where it says they're comedy, and they're the comedy films: PK, Booksmart, Deadpool, Petit Cancan, etc. Action films, dance films, bodies, horror, slow cinema, docs, and political cinema. And in each case, I scribble. So that this piece of paper, which became the sort of Bible, probably took me less than an hour to write, but when you work at that speed, there's a benefit in such rapidity. You could really jump around and structure quite clearly. There's something about cinema which of course, films made in the 1940s were made in the 1940s, and films made today are made today, and yet there's something timeless about cinema. So it's easy when you see a modern musical, for example, to see the antecedents where it came from. So for example, a film like Edgar Wright's beautiful film Baby Driver, when you see that film, you can see Edgar's influences and filmed musicals from the 1930s. And I emailed him to say, I think I saw an old Ruben Mamoulian film in Baby Driver, and he said, you did. And I actually showed that film, it's called Love Me Tonight. He said he showed that film to his team when they were making the film. So there's something timeless about cinema, and it allows you to jump from now to then. I wanted to include films right up to the present day if possible, but it's hard to know if, when you're suddenly overwhelmed by a film, if you'll still be overwhelmed in a few years' time. But when I saw Steve McQueen's Lovers Rock, for example, that famous, beautiful, slow dancing when the music stops, I thought, this already feels like a classic moment. So it had to go in. And so examples like that, you just think, hopefully, even though it's a really recent film, TV piece, it feels immediately something that we'll talk about for a long time. I just love making films, and I make films about lots of subjects, including cinema, but I will always love movies as a fan. I know I'm 56 now. If I'm still alive in 30 years, I will still be hobbling to the cinema. And maybe in 30 years, I'll make an update of the story of film if I can. The pandemic forced us inside ourselves. And when we go inside ourselves, one of the things we find in there is cinema. The films that we've seen all our lives are inside us, and we carry them with us, and they help us. We see the world slightly through the eyes of the movies. And during the pandemic, as well as being confined, a lot of people watched a lot of movies, mostly on streaming platforms, etc. But people saw a lot of stuff. So the pandemic, the COVID years, were also the movie years in some way, So that it's almost like we recharged our movie batteries under COVID, and now we're desperate to get out and back to the biggest screens that we possibly can do. So COVID was a tragedy for the world and our species and for humanity. But for movie lovers, it had some benefits, and we need to, for me, the glass is always half full, and so I can see those benefits. I hope that you enjoy the story of film, A New Generation. Hopefully it'll be shown in many countries. And you might shed a little tear towards the end, but hopefully it'll be a tear of joy.